I'm pregnant, but my boyfriend thinks he's sterile. He's not the father. I told my boyfriend of 5 years that I was pregnant with his miracle baby, but the truth was a secret that could shatter our world. My name is Chloe, and I am 28 years old. The story I'm about to tell you isn't one I'm proud of. It's a story about love, about a devastating mistake, and about a lie so big it grew a heartbeat. It all started on a Tuesday morning, a day that began like any other, with the pale light of dawn filtering through our bedroom blinds. But this Tuesday was different. This Tuesday held the weight of 2 little pink lines. I was kneeling on the cold tile of our bathroom floor, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped the plastic stick. 2 lines. Not the faint, hopeful maybe line, but 2 bold, undeniable, life-altering lines. My heart didn't just drop, it plummeted, crashing through the floorboards of our perfect little life and into a dark, terrifying abyss. My mind, a frantic scramble of static and panic, immediately replayed the doctor's words from 3 years ago. The words that had, in a way, become the foundation of our relationship's future. The words that my boyfriend, Liam, had clung to with a mixture of heartbreak and resignation. We'd been trying for a year. We'd done the tests, the charting, the uncomfortable procedures. And then came the final verdict, delivered by a kind-faced specialist with a folder full of lab results. Liam had a condition, a rare but definitive case of azoospermia. In simple terms, his body didn't produce sperm. The doctor had been gentle but firm. The chances of Liam ever fathering a child were, for all intents and purposes, 0. I remembered holding his hand in that sterile office, feeling the tremor run through his body as he processed the finality of it. I remembered the way he'd looked at me, his eyes full of an apology for something that wasn't his fault, and the way I'd squeezed his hand back, promising him that it didn't matter. We were a team. We'd figure it out, maybe through adoption or a donor. We had each other, and that was all that mattered. And we had been happy, genuinely, deeply happy. Liam was my rock, my best friend, the man who knew every flaw and fear and loved me anyway. We built a life on the ashes of that dream, a life filled with late-night talks, shared pizzas, weekend hikes, and a quiet, unwavering love that I thought was unbreakable. But then, 6 weeks ago, I'd gone on a solo work trip to Chicago, a conference, a mandatory, boring 3-day affair. And on the last night, after 1 too many glasses of complimentary wine at a hotel bar, I'd made a mistake. A single, catastrophic, out-of-character mistake with a colleague whose face I can barely recall, but whose name, Mark, is now seared into my brain. It was a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment fueled by loneliness and alcohol, a stupid, meaningless encounter that I had sworn to take to my grave. I came home and washed that night away, burying it under a mountain of guilt and a desperate need to pretend it never happened. But here it was, the consequence, staring up at me from the bathroom floor. This wasn't just a pregnancy, it was an impossibility, a paradox wrapped in a plastic stick. Liam was sterile. I was pregnant. The math didn't just not add up, it was a complete impossibility. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting, trying to reconcile 2 undeniable facts. I stumbled to my feet, my reflection in the mirror a ghostly pale stranger with wide, terrified eyes. How could I explain this? How could I possibly tell the man who believed he was sterile that I was carrying a child that wasn't his? The thought of his face, the trust shattering in his eyes, was a physical pain in my chest. As I stood there, the 2 pink lines feeling like an accusation, a single treacherous thought began to bloom in the chaos of my mind. A seed of a lie so monstrous, it both horrified and, in that moment, saved me. What if? What if it was a miracle? The word echoed in the silent bathroom, a desperate prayer against the roaring tide of panic. Miracle. It felt like blasphemy, a cheapening of the word. But it was also a lifeline, a tiny, flimsy raft in a stormy sea of my own making. My mind, now working with a terrifying clarity, began to build the narrative. The doctors could be wrong, right? Medicine wasn't infallible. Maybe it was a 1 in a billion chance, a spontaneous reversal, a fluke of nature. It sounded ridiculous, even to me. But what was the alternative? The truth was a guillotine, poised to sever the only thing that truly mattered to me, Liam. I sunk to the floor again, my back against the cool wall, the pregnancy test still clutched in my hand. The details of that night in Chicago rushed back, unwelcome and vivid. The way the hotel bar had been dimly lit, the low hum of conversation, the way Mark had laughed at my stupid joke. I remembered the feeling of being invisible, of being just another face in the crowd, a stark contrast to the way Liam saw me. I remembered the loneliness, a hollow ache that the wine had only amplified. It wasn't about attraction, not really. It was about a fleeting, desperate need to feel something, anything, other than the profound sadness that had sometimes crept in during those long months of failed fertility attempts. It was a stupid, selfish act, and in the cold light of day, it had filled me with a shame so profound I could barely look at myself in the mirror. I had vowed to erase it, to file it away in a locked compartment of my heart labeled "Never Again." And now, that locked compartment had been blown wide open, and its contents were threatening to detonate my entire world. I thought about Liam's reaction to the initial diagnosis. He had been so strong, so focused on me, on my feelings. He held me while I cried, even though he was the one who had received the life-altering news. He researched adoption agencies with a quiet determination and talked about us being the coolest parents on the block, regardless of how our child came to us. He had never once made me feel like our family was incomplete. He had taken his medical reality and turned it into a testament of our love, a challenge we would face together. How could I take that beautiful, resilient man and tell him that his partner, the person he trusted most, had betrayed him in the worst possible way? The image of his face crumbling, of the light in his eyes dimming, was more than I could bear. It wasn't just about losing him, it was about destroying him, about taking his deepest wound and pouring salt into it. The lie, as monstrous as it was, felt like an act of protection, a twisted, misguided way to spare him pain. I could give him this. I could give him this miracle. I could let him believe that the universe had finally, after all the disappointment, given us a gift. I stood up, a decision solidifying in my gut, heavy as a stone. I would hide the truth. I would bury the secret of that one night so deep that even I would almost forget it. I would let him have this joy. I would watch him become a father, and I would carry the weight of my sin alone. It was a penance I was willing to serve. I walked out of the bathroom, my steps slow and deliberate, and hid the positive test in the bottom of my underwear drawer, tucked beneath old lacy things I no longer wore. I had to plan this. I had to make it believable. I couldn't just blurt it out. I needed to create a moment, a memory that would forever be etched in his mind as the moment our miracle began. As I looked around our bedroom, at the photos of us smiling from our various adventures, I felt a profound sense of disconnection, as if I was already living a double life. The woman in those pictures was innocent. The woman standing here now was a fraud. And she was about to tell the biggest lie of her life. The next few days were a masterclass in deception, a performance I never knew I was capable of. I went to work, smiled at my colleagues, answered emails, all while a secret universe was growing inside me. Every so often, I'd place a hand on my still flat stomach, and a jolt of adrenaline, a mixture of fear and a strange flickering protectiveness would shoot through me. I was no longer just Chloe. I was a vessel for a lie. I researched spontaneous pregnancy reversal after azoospermia diagnosis until my eyes burned, finding a handful of rare anecdotal cases that I could cling to like a life raft. I needed to believe my own story, or at least, I needed to be able to sell it with conviction. I waited until Friday night. Liam had had a long week at work, and I suggested we order in his favorite Thai food and have a quiet night in. The atmosphere was cozy, the scent of lemongrass and coconut milk filling our small apartment. We sat on the couch, a blanket draped over our legs, as we mindlessly scrolled through a streaming service, looking for a movie. This was it. This was the moment. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm that drowned out the sound from the television. I took a deep breath, the air catching in my throat. I turned to him, my hand finding his. I told him I had something to tell him, something important. I watched his face, the way his brow furrowed slightly with concern. I started my speech, the one I had rehearsed 100 times in my head. I began by talking about us, about our journey, about how much I loved him and how proud I was of the way he had handled everything with the infertility. I built the foundation of love and trust before I laid the bombshell. Then I said it. I told him that for the past week, I'd been feeling off, that I'd been tired and nauseous, and that a tiny, crazy part of me had wondered. I told him I'd taken a test. I didn't have to fake the tears that welled up in my eyes. They were born from a complex cocktail of genuine joy at the thought of his happiness and a soul-crushing guilt for the deception I was about to unleash. I watched his face as I spoke, searching for any sign of doubt, any flicker of suspicion, but there was none. There was only confusion, then a slow dawning of disbelief. His mouth fell open slightly, his eyes widening as he processed my words. He didn't speak, just stared at me, his mind trying to connect the dots of an impossible equation. Then the shift happened. The disbelief melted away, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated emotion. His eyes, the same eyes that had held so much sadness 3 years ago, now filled with a light so brilliant it was almost blinding. Tears streamed down his face, silent, happy tears. He pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe, his body shaking with sobs of joy. He was whispering my name over and over again, a prayer, a mantra. In that moment, watching the sheer, unbridled happiness radiating from him, I knew I had made my choice. I had sealed my fate. I had given him his miracle, and, in doing so, I had locked my own truth away in a dungeon from which it might never escape. We spent the rest of the night in a haze of wonder, talking about names, about nurseries, about the future we thought was lost to us. He was beaming, his face alight with a joy I hadn't seen in years. As I lay in bed next to him that night, listening to his steady, contented breathing, the weight of my secret settled upon me, a heavy, suffocating blanket. I had done the right thing for him, but for myself, I had just begun serving a life sentence. The first trimester was a strange, surreal blur. The lie, once a terrifying secret, began to feel like a new reality. Liam's joy was infectious, a constant presence in our home that made it hard to dwell on my own guilt. He was transformed. The quiet resignation that had sometimes shadowed him was gone, replaced by a vibrant, almost boyish excitement. He read books on pregnancy and fatherhood with the intensity of a scholar studying for a final exam. He cooked me meals, insisting I get enough nutrients, and rubbed my feet when they were swollen, even though they weren't swollen yet. He talked to my belly every night, his voice a low murmur as he told our unborn child about his day, about the world it was about to enter. And every time he did it, a dagger of guilt twisted in my heart. I was living in a house of cards, and I was terrified of a single gust of wind. Every time we saw friends or family, I was on edge, my smile feeling tight and artificial. I worried someone would see through me, that my deception would be written all over my face. My best friend, Sarah, pulled me aside once, her eyes full of concern, asking if I was okay. She said I seemed distant, stressed. I laughed it off, blaming it on pregnancy hormones, but her words lingered, a reminder that my carefully constructed facade was not as impenetrable as I hoped. The real anxiety began when we hit the second trimester. The initial shock had worn off, and the practicalities of bringing a child into the world started to take center stage. Liam, ever the planner, created a spreadsheet for our baby. It had tabs for everything: nursery furniture, stroller comparisons, college funds. And then, one evening, he clicked on a new tab labeled Genetics and Health. My blood ran cold. He started talking about family medical history on both sides. He wanted to know if my family had a history of anything: heart conditions, diabetes, genetic disorders. He was so enthusiastic, so focused on giving our baby the best possible start in life. I just nodded, my throat tight, unable to form words. How could I tell him I had no idea about the biological father's medical history? I didn't even know the man's last name for sure. His excitement only grew from there. He started talking about all the things our baby might inherit from him. His height, hopefully, he joked, his love for old movies. And then he'd point to his eyes, a deep, piercing shade of blue. I hope she gets your eyes, he'd say, but I wouldn't mind a little mini-me running around with these peepers. He'd laugh, but every time he mentioned it, a cold sweat would prickle on my skin. I had brown eyes, a deep chocolate brown. Liam's were a startling, almost electric blue. It was one of his most striking features. If our baby was born with blue eyes, it would be a testament to our miracle. But if the baby was born with brown eyes, my brown eyes, it would be a silent, undeniable accusation. A question he might never ask out loud, but one that would hang in the air between us forever. The pressure mounted with each passing day. I started having nightmares, vivid, terrifying dreams where I gave birth to a baby with a stranger's face, a baby who looked at me with condemnation. I would wake up gasping, my heart pounding, and reach for Liam, grounding myself in the warmth of his sleeping body beside me. He was my anchor and the source of my greatest torment. One afternoon, while we were at the park, he brought up the topic of prenatal testing. He'd been reading about advanced screenings that could be done, tests that could not only check for chromosomal abnormalities, but could also determine paternity with a simple blood draw from the mother. He said it offhandedly, marveling at the wonders of modern medicine, thinking it was just another tool to ensure our miracle baby was healthy. But for me, it was a threat, a potential exposure of my entire house of cards. He looked at me, his blue eyes full of trust and excitement, and asked what I thought about it. I felt the world tilt, the ground shifting beneath my feet. I had to say something, anything, to steer him away from that path, without raising the slightest bit of suspicion. My mind raced, a frantic search for a plausible excuse. I couldn't just say no, that would be suspicious. I had to frame it in a way that aligned with the persona of the loving, slightly anxious mother-to-be he thought I was. I managed a small, slightly shaky smile, and I told him that I'd been reading about those tests too. I said that while the technology was amazing, I was worried about the false positives, the unnecessary stress it could cause. I played the emotional card, telling him that after everything we'd been through to get here, I didn't want to introduce any more anxiety into our pregnancy. I wanted to enjoy this time, to trust in our miracle, and to believe that everything would be okay. I watched his face as I spoke, my own heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He considered my words, his expression softening. He nodded, his hand finding mine and giving it a gentle squeeze. He agreed. He said my peace of mind was the most important thing, and if I wasn't comfortable with the tests, we wouldn't do them. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, the relief so potent it almost brought me to my knees. I had dodged a bullet, but the close call left me shaken. From that day on, the lie felt heavier, more suffocating. Every conversation about the baby felt like walking through a minefield. I started to withdraw, not just from Liam, but from everyone. I canceled plans with Sarah, claiming I was too tired. I avoided family gatherings, inventing excuses about morning sickness or doctor's appointments. The isolation was a direct consequence of my deception. The more people I was around, the higher the chances of someone saying something that could unravel my carefully constructed narrative. I was a prisoner in my own life, and the walls were closing in. The physical changes in my body made the lie more real, more tangible. My belly began to swell, a gentle, rounded curve that was a constant physical reminder of my secret. People would touch it, strangers in the grocery store, coworkers at the office, their hands warm and full of congratulations. Each touch felt like a test, a judgment. Then, one evening as I was lying on the couch reading, I felt it. A tiny flutter, like a butterfly's wings brushing against the inside of my uterus. I gasped, my hand flying to my stomach. I called for Liam, my voice filled with a genuine, unscripted awe. He rushed over, his eyes wide with excitement. I placed his hand on my belly, and we waited. A few seconds later, it happened again. A faint, magical stir. The look on Liam's face was one of pure, unadulterated wonder. He was completely captivated, his gaze locked on my stomach as if he was witnessing a divine event. And in that moment, I felt a surge of love for this baby, a fierce protective instinct that overshadowed my fear. This wasn't just a lie anymore. It was a life, a tiny, innocent being who was depending on me. But that connection was immediately followed by a wave of cold, hard dread. This flutter, this first sign of life, was also the first sign of the ticking clock. Soon, there would be a baby. A real live person, with a face, with eyes, with features that would tell a story I couldn't control. The lie was no longer an abstract concept. It was about to have a face. As I watched Liam, his face illuminated by a love so pure it broke my heart. I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. The weight of it was crushing me, and the birth of our child would be the final, ultimate judgment. The third trimester was a countdown. Every kick, every Braxton Hicks contraction, every doctor's appointment was a reminder that my time was running out. The nursery was painted a soft, neutral yellow, the crib was assembled, and tiny, perfectly folded onesies filled the drawers. Our home was ready for a baby, but my soul was a chaotic mess of fear and anticipation. Liam was in his element, a nesting whirlwind of activity. He installed the car seat with the precision of a NASA engineer and packed my hospital bag with a checklist that would put a Boy Scout to shame. His certainty, his unwavering belief in our perfect little family was a constant, painful reminder of my betrayal. The breaking point came on a sunny Saturday in late July. Liam's parents were visiting from out of state. They were overjoyed, showering me with gifts and advice, their faces alight with the prospect of their first grandchild. We were sitting in the living room, the air thick with excitement, when Liam's mother, Carol, pulled out a photo album. It was filled with pictures of Liam as a baby. There he was, a chubby, bald little thing with a toothy grin and those same piercing blue eyes. Carol pointed to a picture of Liam as a newborn, swaddled in a blue blanket. "He had these eyes from the moment he was born," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Every single person in the hospital commented on them. They're a Miller family trait, you know, goes back generations." My blood turned to ice. A family trait? Generations? The words echoed in my head, a death knell for my fragile hope. I had been clinging to the possibility that the baby's eyes could be a genetic wildcard, a toss-up, but Carol's words destroyed that possibility. If this baby was born with anything other than those signature Miller blue eyes, it wouldn't just be a question for Liam, it would be a question for his entire family. The secret I had thought was mine alone suddenly felt like it had the potential to explode and take down everyone I loved. I excused myself, claiming I needed to lie down. I fled to the sanctuary of our bedroom, my heart hammering against my ribs. I locked the door behind me and sank to the floor, my body racked with silent, gut-wrenching sobs. The lie was no longer a burden I could carry alone. It was a ticking time bomb that was about to detonate in the middle of my family. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't live with the constant fear, the suffocating guilt, the paralyzing anxiety. I had to tell him. I had to face the consequences, no matter how devastating they might be. I pulled a notebook and a pen from my nightstand. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely write. I started a letter, a confession. I wrote about my love for him, about the profound sadness of his diagnosis, about the mistake in Chicago. I poured every ounce of my guilt and regret onto the page, the words flowing in a torrent of tear-stained ink. I wrote about my fear of losing him, about my selfish decision to lie, and about the crushing weight of the secret I had carried. I didn't know if I would ever have the courage to give him this letter, but writing it felt like a first step toward reclaiming my soul. As I wrote the final words, a sharp, intense pain seized my abdomen, stealing my breath. It wasn't a Braxton Hicks contraction. This was different. This was real. Another wave of pain followed, stronger than the first. I dropped the pen, my eyes widening in panic. It was time. The baby was coming, and my time was up. The next few hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Liam rushed me to the hospital, his face a mask of calm efficiency that barely masked the panic in his eyes. The world narrowed to the rhythmic beeping of machines, the encouraging voices of nurses, and the intense, all-consuming waves of pain that racked my body. Through it all, the letter I had written felt like a lead weight in my purse, a final, desperate confession waiting to be read. I pushed, my body a vessel of pure instinct, fueled by a primal need to bring this life into the world. And then, after what felt like an eternity, a final, guttural push and a cry. A tiny, piercing wail that filled the delivery room and shattered my heart into a million pieces. They placed the baby on my chest, a warm, wriggling, beautiful little girl. I looked down at her tiny fingers and her perfect rosebud mouth, and I was overwhelmed by a love so fierce and so profound it took my breath away. And then I looked at her eyes. They were open, dark, and unfocused, scanning the world for the first time. They were brown, my brown. The sight was a final, undeniable confirmation of my sin. Liam was at my side, his face streaked with tears of joy. He leaned down, kissing my forehead, then gently stroked our daughter's cheek. He was so lost in his happiness, so consumed by the love for this tiny miracle that he didn't see. He didn't see the truth that was staring him right in the face. In that moment, watching him, my heart broke for him all over again. I couldn't do it. I couldn't let him live this beautiful, perfect lie. I couldn't let him build a life on a foundation of my betrayal. He deserved the truth. He deserved to make his own choices, even if it meant losing him. I took a deep breath, the air catching in my throat, and I spoke. My voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from exhaustion and emotion. I told him I had something to tell him, something I should have told him a long time ago. I told him I loved him more than anything in the world, and then I began to confess. I told him everything. The work trip, the mistake, the positive test, the lie. The words tumbled out, a torrent of truth that I had held back for months. The room fell silent, save for the soft cry of our daughter. I watched his face, searching for a reaction. The joy in his eyes didn't just fade, it was extinguished, replaced by a slow dawning horror, a look of profound, soul-crushing betrayal. His face went pale, his expression crumbling as the weight of my words crashed down on him. He didn't speak, he didn't yell, he just stared at me, his eyes filled with a pain so deep it was physical. He gently placed his hand on our daughter's head one last time, then turned and walked out of the room, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The silence he left behind was deafening, a void filled with the wreckage of our life. The aftermath was a blur of lawyers and quiet conversations. Liam didn't come back to me, but he didn't disappear from our daughter's life. He came to the hospital every day to see her, to hold her, to learn the curves of her face. He looked at her with a love that was mingled with a deep, abiding sadness. We never spoke of what happened next, of us. There was no us anymore. There was just him and me and the beautiful, innocent consequence of my mistake. I moved into a small apartment, a world away from the life we had built. My days are now a cycle of feedings, diaper changes, and the quiet, overwhelming task of raising a child on my own. It's harder than I ever imagined, but it's also more real. I live with my truth every day. It's not a miracle, and it's not a fairy tale. It's just my life, a life I built on a lie and that I am now trying to rebuild, one honest day at a time for the little girl who deserves nothing less.